Welcome to How to Build a Nonprofit, the only podcast dedicated to deep dive interviews with nonprofit founders about their journey, their why, board development, fundraising, staffing, leadership, and making a big impact. We ask courageous and visionary founders about their struggles and successes and everything in between. As a listener, all you have to do is learn and appreciate. I'm your host, Jordan Thierry, and this is How to Build a Nonprofit. When we talk about racial justice organizing, I think we often imagine this work happening in major urban centers with storied movement histories like Chicago, Oakland, and Jackson, Mississippi. But as cities have changed over the last 2 decades due to gentrification and shifting job markets, suburbs are now the most diverse areas in the U.S. So what does racial justice organizing look like in these communities? In this episode, I interview Siobhana McEwen from the Southwest Washington Equity Coalition, who speaks to that very point, addressing the sharp need for advocacy and policy change to address the needs of people of color and immigrants in this stretch of the Portland metro region. We deep dive into grassroots activism, the challenges of nonprofit leadership, and the power of community trust and collaboration. All of this and more in today's episode, and I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. For more episode content, grant and fellowship opportunities, and our book club chat room, visit howtobuildanonprofit.org. All right, Siobhana, we are live. Thanks for joining. You can hear me well?
I can, yeah, loud and clear.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much for jumping on the podcast. Excited to jump into conversation today with you, talk about the Southwest Equity Coalition. Can you just start by telling us a little bit about yourself, your background, and how you ended up in Washington State?
Yeah, I grew up in rural western Nebraska, real small town, in the middle of nowhere, and I ended up I have a long line of teachers in my family, and so I ended up teaching social studies. I taught for 4 years, a year in Wyoming and 3 years in Nebraska. And I'd grown up in Nebraska. I wanted to kind of get out of the area and see what else was going on in the world. So I moved to Oregon and had a hard time landing a job teaching. I didn't have my master's degree, and it was shortly after the recession, and so it was just hard. It was a hard time, and so I ended up enlisting in the military. I joined the Navy, and I got stationed in Everett on USS Nimitz. So I lived in Everett for about 7 years, and when I got out, I was in the Navy for about 5 years. When I got out, I went to graduate school at the University of Washington School of Social Work, and my wife said, "Okay, we've had enough time in Everett. We need to get back to Portland now." We wanted to start a family, and she had family in the area, and we had met in Portland, and so we decided to try and move back to Portland, and we landed in Vancouver as a stop. We couldn't afford to rent in Portland. It was too expensive at the time. So we got a house in Orchards, which is a neighborhood of Vancouver, and my son was born, and I would take him out for walks in the morning and notice that I was seeing, I saw a Latino family over here and a South Asian family over there and a Black family over there. And I said, this neighborhood doesn't look like Portland. Because when I lived in Portland, almost everybody I saw was white. I rarely ever saw anybody who was a person of color. And I was like, this is pretty nice. I really like this. And so just over the course of the year, we just really fell in love with Vancouver and realized that there was a lot of diversity here, and ended up deciding to go ahead and put our roots down in Vancouver instead of Portland.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's step back just a second, because, our listeners are all over the nation, all over the world, and people may not be familiar with the area. And when we speak of Vancouver, assume that we're talking about Canada, right?
Oh, sure.
We're talking about Washington State. Can you just paint a picture for folks? Like what does Vancouver, Washington, the Southwest Washington area, like what are its characteristics? What makes it a special place?
Yeah. So we call ourselves Vancouver, USA. Vancouver,
Nice.
Washington is a small town. It's about 200,000 people. We are located right across the Columbia River from Portland, and we're on the tribal lands, indigenous lands of the Chinook, the Cowlitz and members of the Lower Columbia River. Um, I think one of the things that makes this place special. I like to say that Vancouver is a vibrant community, and I actually feel like there is so much energy. I think it's almost kinetic. Like you can feel the energy, you can feel
Mm.
the pulse of this community just walking down the street or driving through different neighborhoods.
So, I'm from Washington County, in the Portland metropolitan region, on the other side, basically, right on the west
Yep.
side, southwest side. Uh, Also very diverse, neighborhoods and metro part of the metro region. But I think maybe like Vancouver area maybe has eclipsed Washington County in terms of diversity at this point. Can you just tell us about how diverse the Southwest Washington, Vancouver area is and has become in recent years?
Yeah, 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 absolutely. So, this I think it's one of the most diverse places I've ever lived. We in from 2010 to 2020, the city of Vancouver experienced population growth of about 68,000 people, and a third of those folks were people of color. And so we have a
Wow.
very robust and diverse Latino community, people from all over Central and Latin America. We have a huge Pacific Islander community. We have actually the largest population of people from the island of Chuuk anywhere outside of the island itself.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, and that's an island. I mean, there's disaster gentrification basically
Hmm.
happening. That island is being consumed by the Pacific Ocean, and more people are moving here. We have about 5% of our population is Black folks, and we have a lot of folks whose families were kind of the original Black Vancouverites, still have descendants who live here. And we have a growing Asian and South Asian population as well. Um, One of the things that's really interesting about our community is that we don't have a specific neighborhood that people of color have
Hmm.
taken over or have lived in. The way that Vancouver developed over history is, we have our people are spread all over the city. So there are like some small pockets that go across the city, but I think that's one thing that's really unique. We don't have a neighborhood that is where the people of color live. We're
Right.
everywhere, which
Right.
is really fantastic.
Yeah. No, that's true. And I love that. I love that about the Vancouver area. And so, when I came upon your organization and was learning more about it, was just really excited because I see, you know, the if we could consider Vancouver as like sort of a suburb of Portland, if you will, right? The increased like diversification of the suburbs of these major cities, but really oftentimes lack the kind of support and resources and institutions that have a history behind them of supporting communities of color, advancing and addressing human rights issues, getting folks involved in voting and other forms of civic engagement. And so I was really excited to read more about the organization. Can you just tell us a little bit about like how you all got started and what your role was in that?
Yeah, absolutely. Complete transparency, I wasn't even in the community when the org got started. We've been around since 2016. There's a group of women, we call them our foremothers, or our
Mhm.
founding mothers. There were predominantly Latino women. There was a Black woman who, in 2016, saw their neighbors being terrorized and kidnapped,
Mhm.
similarly to the way that we are experiencing the world today.
Yeah.
And they said, we have to do something about this. We can't just stand by. And one of the women worked at the Community Foundation of Southwest Washington, and she said, yeah, you're right. And we want to help facilitate that. We want to help capacitate these efforts. And so our foremothers were able to bring together this coalition. They asked nonprofits to pledge 2 staff members to participate in meetings with our coalition every month. And that started in 2016 it culminated in 2016 with meetings that they were able to pull together elected officials, law enforcement leaders, and members of our undocumented community to come together in a public space and hold our elected officials accountable to be able to say, we don't condone the kidnapping of undocumented members of our community. Vancouver is a place where everyone can and should feel safe, and we want that to happen. And you are valued, and we appreciate you. And that actually spread. So they actually held those forums not just in Vancouver, but across Clark County and other communities as well. So to
Wow.
imagine that happening 8 years ago is pretty, pretty powerful. So, one of
Mhm.
those women went on to, she's on city council now. Another one has
Oh,
a whole
wow.
nother organization that she has launched and created that does incredible work. And, they're all doing really powerful things. But over the course of time, we we kind of became this equity catch-all. We started with a real commitment to holding elected officials and law enforcement accountable to protect undocumented folks, but then they said, well, now what? What do we do now? And 2016, 2018, 2020, equity was a really sexy word.
Mhm, mhm.
Everybody wanted it, everybody wanted to learn about it, and we kind of became this place where if the word equity was in somebody's question or in a statement, then the response was, "Oh, go check out SWEC,
Mhm,
Southwest Washington
mhm,
Equity Coalition, find out what they're
mhm.
doing and do whatever they say." And so we had some really incredible projects as a volunteer organization. We held our first A-Ready conference. It's Advancing Racial Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. We did that in 2020. Was a 12-month-long webinar series. We had over 600 unduplicated participants over that year.
Wow.
Every month we would elevate, different people of color talking about how to solve problems or, what they felt the
Mhm,
solution to certain problems were from our perspective,
mhm,
and had a lot of people tune into that. We helped facilitate $1 million grant that brought culturally specific community-based health workers into the community to
mm,
decrease vaccine hesitancy for COVID. And
mhm,
we were very successful in a lot of these areas, really trying to basically advance racial justice, kind of at the end of the day, that's what we
mhm,
were trying to do. Um,
mhm.
so so that was mostly what we were doing in the years between 2016 and 2020 when I or 2020, yeah, 2020 when I got involved with the organization.
Okay, so you came in around 2020. 2020 was a big year for nonprofits
Mhm.
in many ways, both challenging, and also created a lot of opportunities, especially for those doing social justice, racial justice related work. Would you say basically, those first few years were very emergent, very nascent, and then like that 2020 between the pandemic and the uprising was catapulted your organization to like another level of responsibility
Yeah.
and programming.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. As I mentioned, we were all volunteer and organizations would commit, they would pledge their staff to attend a meeting, but
Hmm.
you know, all the people that you've talked to who have started up nonprofits know that, it's not a one meeting a month sort of
Right.
gig, right?
Right, right.
And I think too, we found, especially in 2020 and 2021, we found that volunteer coalition to really decrease our efficiency. There would be for a couple years actually, Clark County had the highest rate of police murders per capita in the state of Washington. So we would find ourselves
Wow.
oftentimes trying to respond to, I'm going to say state sanctioned violence, frankly,
Hmm. Hmm.
um, and be really tied up by the fact that our membership couldn't sign off on a letter or a press release because each of them had to go through their chain of
Own
command. Each of
processes,
them had to
right.
go through their
Hmm.
whole own process with their board and their leadership. When we wanted to apply for different grants, we found that we were kind of struggling because who had time to write the grant in the amount of time that it took to,
Hmm.
submit the grant and that sort of thing. And so the grassroots was very effective and it was really hard to maintain the momentum, especially the momentum that was needed to capitalize on the energy in 2020 and
Right.
2021, from a volunteer perspective, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You had to move quick in those moments. And
Yes.
when you're a coalition organization, depending on the the structure and processes that you set up, you can't really get bogged down and kind of lose the rhythm um, because of these different kind of protocols, right? Or lack thereof protocols too.
Yeah. I do wanna say I think it's always very important though, there's famous phrase about moving at the speed of trust, and I do think that,
Hmm.
that also can be a downside,
Hmm.
when you start moving too quickly and you
Hmm.
forget about who you're committed to and who you need to be accountable to, and
Yeah.
so I think in that decision for us to become a nonprofit, they're really one of the biggest, pieces that we really had to contemplate was, how will we still be rooted in and accountable to community, even if we become a nonprofit? And
Hmm.
also always like to say, frankly, the book, The Revolution Will Not Be Funded,
Hmm.
we now have a 501(c)(3), we have a 501(c)(4), and we have a PAC. I think that we are very, very progressive, but we are no longer radical because we
Hmm.
have a tax status. Once you have
Yeah,
a tax
absolutely.
status, you're no longer radical, right? And so I think that I think it's really important to remember the power of what happened when we were volunteer, the amount
Hmm.
of people who put their, blood, sweat, and tears. They were working their 9 to 5, and then SWEC was their 5 to 9, and other
Right.
activities were their 5 to 9, and just the passion that came from that and commitment to community. I mean, I think we have to remember that, and that has to be something that we reflect on and that guides us in our work moving forward, whether I'm here or not, anybody who comes in
Hmm.
next. I think that's something that needs to be baked into our culture.
Yeah, no, I'm so glad you brought that up. Let's spend a little bit more time talking about this because I think it's really important for organizations or groups that decide to become organizations that are grassroots and kind of coalition or membership based to really consider these different dynamics, right? So, first, what was your solution to addressing that issue around trying to move quickly and also moving at the speed of trust,
Yeah.
and account and ensuring there's accountability there, right, as well to your
Yeah.
members. What was your solution to address that?
Well, let me just say too, I think it's still in progress. I don't think that
Mhm.
we've 100% addressed it yet. I think we still have work to do. But so I was asked to throw my name in the hat to be the chair of the coalition. And the vote for that happened. I'm 100% positive nobody else volunteered, but the vote the vote for that happened at the same night as we voted to become a 501(c)(3). And so my period as chair was, really I just had to steward that process, right? And in doing so, um, I decided, I was working a 50, 60 hour a week job at the time. And,
Mhm.
and so I decided we actually needed to pause our membership meetings, um, given we chose to become a nonprofit because of people's capacity and lack thereof. And so um, I chose to pause our membership meetings, but instead built a board of directors who were all longtime members of the coalition.
Mhm.
And those people guided and informed the process of developing our bylaws, our articles of incorporation, and were very, very active and met often. And all of them came from organizations that were deeply rooted in community. So we paused membership meetings for about a year while we figured out, okay, what do we do and how do we do this now as a 501(c)(3). And what we decided to do was we did create a membership dues structure, and the dues are tiered. We have some really big organizations that are members. So we have two county departments that are members. We have two city departments that are members. We have some multi-million dollar organizations that are members, and we said, you have the ability, you need to pay the largest chunk of
Mm-hmm.
dues. You need to pay the
Mm-hmm.
highest rate. But then we have other organizations that are grassroots or are culturally, specific and are the most, disproportionately impacted. And so we said, we're not going to ask you what you want to pay. We're not going to tell you what you have to pay. We're just going to say, here's our tiered structure, and you pay what you want. And so, and then we set up meetings every other month with those folks. And so we've been able to, right now we have over 3 dozen member organizations who come together every other month to serve on various committees, but they all pay dues, or many of them pay dues. We have some members that don't pay dues.
Mm-hmm.
But we've raised $60,000 in dues, give or take. And in 2025, we asked them, we did a participatory budget with them, and we said, what do you want to spend your money on? Our one caveat is that we have to have a committee. Staff's one caveat is that we have to have a committee called the cream committee. Instead of cash rules everything around me, it's culture rules everything around me.
Ooh, that's
And
dope.
so,
I love that.
and so we said you have to have a culture rules everything around me committee, and you have to contribute funds back to community, any sort of event that is advancing racial justice, that is people participating in their culture in some way.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've actually put out over $45,000 just in 2025, Jordan, back into the community. Tonight there's a
Wow.
powwow that we're helping to sponsor. Dia de
Mm.
los Muertos was a couple weekends ago. We helped
Mm-hmm.
sponsor that. All sorts of activities to just really allow people in our community to express themselves authentically. Um, so I'm getting a little off task, but
Yeah.
but yeah, sorry.
But no, but that's super dope. I loved it. I love the kind of repurposing cream,
Yeah.
and but also just that principle, right? Of taking that money, investing some of those dues dollars into just the cultural work and community. It's super powerful. So you talked about your membership structure, and you have members that you are city or government agencies, right?
Yep.
Um, and then you have members that are nonprofit organizations, right? So I mean, that can be complex, especially with an organization that is trying to advance racial justice locally. How do you all address the tensions that come up through, the kind of strategies that you want to pursue?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing that we do is we recognize that this work isn't going to get done in a day or in one
Hmm.
conversation, or even in one project. And so the fact is, we have city and government employees who are deeply invested in advancing racial justice. And they understand that they have to work within the confines of a system. And
Hmm.
then we have nonprofit members whose staff are also deeply committed to advancing racial justice, who find themselves actually needing to work within the confines of another system. The
Yep.
nonprofit industrial complex is a very real system that,
Not to
that they're
be
having to
underestimated.
navigate.
Yeah,
No, it's
yeah,
not. Yeah. And then we have grassroots folks who are also
yeah,
members who
yeah.
say, what the heck? We're working
Yeah.
outside of this system. What's going on, but we have to remember that all of our people who come to these meetings are deeply committed to advancing racial justice. So we really at SWEC play a role where we try to facilitate inside-outside strategy. We know that the systems by themselves won't change without those grassroots partners demanding change. But we
Mhm.
also know that if we burn it down, our systems, we're not going to have anybody, we're not anarchists. We believe
Yeah.
that, structure in and of itself is not inherently bad. And so
Mhm.
how do we build systems and structures that work to serve all of us? And so
Mm.
again, we try to find that commonality, the fact that everyone is committed to the same goal. And we try to, we have organizational agreements that we lean into really heavily that also apply to our membership block. And those agreements are based off of the courageous conversations about race protocol
Mhm.
around how to talk about race. And we center race and racial justice in everything that we do. And so, and frankly, one of the things that has happened is that our membership block has actually become, as we have structured it more as a nonprofit, it has become more white. It
Yes.
has become more
Mhm.
corporate, in
Mhm.
terms of nonprofit corporations, right? And so now we're looking to try to understand, okay, then what are other ways that SWEC can meet the needs of our grassroots community leaders of color? And what
Mhm.
do we need to do, because we want to build the biggest table we possibly can, but we also want to ensure that it's not just full of white folks who want to
Right.
advance racial justice. We want our table to be built for communities of color and with communities of color. And so I think it's a constant. How do we navigate these tensions and try to
Mhm.
bring folks in together to be in proximity to each other? And how do we remain malleable and flexible to do so?
Yeah, well, I'd like to talk a little bit more about that because it's definitely, a a dynamic that, I've also had to try to work through in some of my, work with nonprofits. Um, this is, when you're in a suburban context, right? And a very multiracial suburban context. And your organization is focused on, racial justice and working with folks of color, but you're inclusive. I mean, the thing is about our communities that they're integrated, they're diverse, right? Like
Mhm.
even if you're serving one particular kind of cultural group, that doesn't mean they don't have white folks in their families, right? And
Right.
and so like even in that, right? And so for Southwest Washington Equity Coalition, you all are inclusive. You work with communities of color, and also you have white folks who are members, who also are work within the different member organizations. Um, how can you give an example of how you try to balance that, basically making sure that the voices of people of color, the marginalized folks, um, are are still at the center of the work
Yeah.
of the organization,
Yeah.
because it can easily sometimes, start to get out of hand sometimes,
Yeah, yeah. Well, so first and foremost, I'd say our staff and our board are predominantly people of color. We
Mhm.
have one staff who's part time, who's white. The rest of our staff, and starting January, we'll have 6 full time staff are all female identifying people of color.
Mm.
Our
Right.
board is 70% people of color. Um, on for both our C3 and our C4, and diverse. Our boards are diverse. Um, so, and we are committed to hiring predominantly staff of color, to filling our board predominantly with people of color is very
Mhm.
important to us, that the people in the decision-making spaces are people of color in this organization. Programmatically, I wanna share a little bit. I have to give a huge shout out to my director of programs who has taken our A-Ready conference, I think, to another level. The initial A-Ready was super successful. Again, over 600 unduplicated participants over a year. But the point of that conference was to educate white people on
Right.
how to hear from and trust and learn from people of color.
Mhm.
This A-Ready conference, we were as much smaller. We had about 100 people total
Mhm.
over the course of the day in and out of the conference, only 12 sessions. But she built this program entirely centering people of color. The program was people of color, how do we attract facilitation sessions that you want to
Yeah.
learn, right? What do you want to learn? And how do we center that? What do you want to teach? And how do we center that? And how do we keep our communities the priority, and understanding, hey, white folks, just because our community is the priority doesn't mean you're not welcome. It
Right.
just means you won't be centered. Right? So you can come and you participate, ask questions, be curious, learn,
Mhm.
but know that this is not a space that you are inherently entitled to. this is a space that was built for people of color. And so I think that she just did a really phenomenal job in the way that she curated the entire program and the
Hmm.
way that we marketed it and the way that we attracted our participants to come or attendees to come. And I think that that's one of the big differences when you have an organization that is predominantly run by and for communities of color. They understand that we can center our needs and white folks are welcome to join. In fact, we want white folks to join, but
Hmm.
we're not gonna center
Right.
white learning, we're not gonna center white fragility, we're not gonna center white supremacy. We're gonna
Hmm.
center the excellence and the beauty and the power of people of color.
Hmm. Beautiful. Yeah, I love that. I love that. And that's super helpful. And I know it's an ongoing, it's not like you solve the problem, right? Like
Right.
it's an ongoing thing that you have to support and cultivate and manage within your organization as a leader. You mentioned your program director. Let's talk about staff.
Yeah.
So when you all, incorporated as a nonprofit, who were the first staff people and how did you all sort of grow in terms of your internal staff capacity?
Yeah. So our first hire was a executive director. That was something that was really important to our foremothers, and it was something that was really important to our board at the time when we were going through um, the deciding. I recused myself a lot from conversations because I knew that I wanted to be the first ED.
Mm.
But our board members knew that if we were going to have an organization that was run by and for people of color, we wanted to pay a leader to come in and do the work of building the organization, especially given the fact that we had spent at the time it was six years all volunteer. And
Yeah.
so many of our volunteers were women, and they said, we want to hire an executive director first, and we want to pay that person to do the job that we need them to do because
Hmm.
we believe in paying people.
Right.
And so I recused myself from a lot of those conversations, but I stepped down as the board chair in um, July of 2023 and was hired in October of 2023 as the first executive director. They put me through a application
Okay.
process and
Yeah.
did their full vetting and called my references, and they acted like we hadn't been working together for the last
Right.
couple of years. They were
Yeah.
they were really thorough.
That's cool.
Um, but one of the things that we have done, again, as I've said, we have predominantly hired people of color. We again, we have a one white staff member who I mean, she's incredible, and she has recently moved down to part-time from her own, she made that own decision for herself, but we, in January, we will have 6 staff.
Okay.
And one of the things I think I'm most proud of is that we have been able to make a commitment and maintain a commitment to pay all of our staff no less than a living wage. So doesn't matter what position you have, you will not come in to our organization and make less than $75,000 a year. We have health benefits that are 100% employer paid for the staff, and starting in January this year, we also will have a retirement program where we offer 3% matching for our staff, and we're going to be training our staff on what does retirement mean and how do you save for
Mm.
retirement and how can you capitalize on 3%. It's
Yeah.
to get a full match, and so I think that we again, I'll just briefly say we have a real commitment as an organization to do what we can to care for the staff
Hmm.
who come to work here. We have a really generous time off package that we start everybody. Your first 40 hours on the job are actually mandatory rest time because
Mm.
rest is resistance.
Ooh.
And we want people to come in. We know people oftentimes go from job to job without being able to afford to take time off. And
Yeah.
so we want to hire people who are committed to this work. We want to hire people who can carry the heavy load, but we want
Hmm.
to really care deeply and invest in our staff.
Wow. I've never heard that that one before. That first 40 hours is rest. That's amazing. Um, let me ask you this because I know, this may be something other executive directors and board members would be interested in. How did you come up with the benchmark for a livable wage?
Yeah. So, there's a lot if you look at if you talk to HR professionals, there's a lot of, research that they do to determine what is a comparable wage,
Hmm.
but we do so much policy work and advocacy work that,
Right.
um and I don't have an HR background, and I'm not that concerned about what, other people are paying. I'm concerned about
Right.
what I'm paying. There is national data around the cost of what it
Yeah.
costs to live in every zip code in the country,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
so we know that in the city of Vancouver, somebody who makes minimum wage would have to work, over, 83 hours a week to be able to make a living wage,
Hmm.
and we know that the living wage in the city of Vancouver is $35 an hour, which is roughly
Hmm.
$75,000 a year. So, again, that data comes from mostly from housing statistics,
Right.
housing analytics. So, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I would also refer people to the Equity Atlas
yes,
from the
yeah,
organization Policy Link that has a really pretty robust set of data points at the local level in terms of like affordability and
yeah.
wages and stuff like that could also be helpful.
I
So,
think,
yeah.
yeah, I'll just say briefly. I'm sorry. Somebody told me. Actually, I was in a training earlier this week, and the facilitator said, "How many of you are paying a living wage?" And I was really proud to raise my hand, and they said, "That means you're paying a minimum wage."
Mm,
And I said, "Oh man," and I think that that's absolutely right. And I think when we look at for-profit corporations,
hmm.
they understand that.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
nonprofits,
Yeah.
there's something in that word nonprofit that has devalued
Yes.
the work that we're doing. And so
100%.
as organizational leaders, I think we have an opportunity to simply make a commitment, especially as a startup. I'll say that
Yeah.
too, Jordan, that, some of my peers who are in long lasting, long standing organizations have said, Siobhana, you are really hurting me because
Right.
I cannot pay my staff what you are paying your staff. And
Mhm,
that's true
mhm.
because they have been around for so long. They have built their systems to depend on them not
Yeah,
paying their staff
yeah,
more. And so as a startup, you have an opportunity to say, look, this is inherent in our values. And so
yeah.
we are going to build our system off of our values, which means we have a very flat pay structure. I don't make that.
Mhm.
I make less than 20% more than my lowest paid staff. I don't make
Right.
that much.
Mhm,
We'll keep those costs low. We'll keep the leaders' pay low
mhm.
to be able to afford, the
Right.
living wage for everybody.
Yeah,
And we can bake that into our culture and our values.
yeah. Wow. No, I think that's right, and, one of the I've been a part of, looking at these issues, within an organization, as a, consultant and a board member, and again, like, it's really hard to kinda make those shifts and restructure once you've once you're so far down that road and you've
Yeah.
got 10, 15, 20 staff, right? And you're like,
Yeah.
oh, if we bump folks up by 5%, it's going to cost 2 million. You're like, oh, damn. Like,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
crazy. So like, yeah, if you're just getting your organization started or, you currently don't have too big of a team, like try to start making those changes now
Yeah.
before the ball gets too far down the road and you can't it'll be just a lot difficult to make those shifts that you need and with the budget that you have um and since we're talking about your team, I'm also curious about something. So you work with a relatively small team. You are paying folks a livable wage. Um, you're doing advocacy work, community work. So I know that folks are also, they have responsibilities on the evenings and weekends at times, I'm sure,
Yeah.
going to city council meetings, et cetera. Um, how, as a leader and a manager of people, if you consider yourself that, how do you, sort of provide your team with like the guidelines um, of that work life balance and, accountability for, doing the things that we signed up to do?
Yeah. Well, it's a little bit of a catch-22 when you pay somebody a living wage, in the state of Washington, that's also considered salary, and so
Right.
salary, you don't get paid for your overtime, so we
Mm-hmm.
do really try hard to make sure that our people are comping their time. I've got one employee who, she works, 1 Saturday a month, every month for 7 or 8 months of the year.
Mm-hmm.
So, on those weeks that she's working that Saturday, she'll either take she gets her pick, does she wanna take Friday off or Monday off? And she just
Right.
takes that time, and
Yeah.
I don't charge her PTO for that. We have
Right.
another employee who just on our 501(c)(4) side, just finished running a ballot measure campaign. She's been
Mm-hmm.
working since June on running this
Yeah.
campaign. She's been putting in 50, 60-hour weeks. She's taken a whole week off. I'm not charging her PTO,
Right.
because she needs to rest, and so I
Mm-hmm.
think the nice thing when you're small is that you're able to communicate with your staff, and you can set the expectation of, "We need to communicate about where are you gonna be? What are you working? What's your
Right.
expectation?" And then the policy for us is, that for each hour that you work beyond, the regular hours, if it is kinda excessive, then you can comp your time, and we
Mm-hmm.
recognize everybody might have a couple days or a couple weeks where they're working, maybe they work 45 or 50 hours one week, but maybe then they only work 30 or 35 hours the next week.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, we just really try to be very communicative about that. And then if folks wanna take, additional time, then we do have PTO policy. But I think that communication and the expectation that the work, regardless, still needs to get done, and in a startup,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes that does mean that we do have to work.
Yeah.
Yesterday, I had a 14-hour day at work, and
Mm-hmm.
today I'm back at it, and that's the way that
Yeah.
it's gonna be, and maybe that means that, next week I can take a day and only do a half
Mm-hmm.
a day, but we
Right.
have to do the work.
Yeah, definitely. And honestly, that's something I struggle with. I was brought up in this field in a culture of, like you just work and you you know what I mean? And like
Yeah.
all of the gigs that I've had, there's been a really good level of flexibility. So like if you
Mhm.
got some personal stuff you got to take care of, like you go ahead and take care of that. You know what I mean? But we're not necessarily like I didn't come up in like a, hey, I traveled Sunday night, so like I'm gonna take off Monday morning kind of thing or whatever,
Yeah,
right? Or I'm not looking to
yeah,
like earn that time back necessarily. Um, but that's kind of my generation in this work, and so I'm also I'm trying to get better about that. And then for me personally too, like I work for myself and I work a lot,
yeah,
but I try to earn that back by this last year, the last 2 years, I've taken all of August off, which was really, really nice for me to catch up and catch my breath and everything. But yeah, it's definitely a difficult balance. While we're on the topic of our staff and our teams, what kind of supports do you utilize from consultants, contractors on sort of the HR admin related tasks, if any?
Well, I've been really fortunate that both of my boards have, HR, experts on my board,
Oh,
and so
nice.
frankly, it's challenging, and I do feel for my staff that, I'm the supervisor and disciplinarian, and I'm also HR. And so,
Hmm.
one thing that we've done is, I've given my staff, both board chairs phone numbers, and then we know that we've got 2 HR folks on both boards, but we did bring in a consultant earlier this year to do some, restorative justice and conflict resolution work between one of
Hmm.
my staff and I.
Hmm.
And we utilize a software, a Gusto platform,
Hmm.
that has HR and payroll. Um,
Right.
it's kind of the bare minimum. We don't tap into the HR very often. We have tried to bring in some consultants, like I said.
Hmm.
And then we have a bookkeeper that supports our work as well.
Okay.
Um, So we don't rely on the gusto to do the bookkeeping, although I think it could, but, and we use, MonkeyPod as our C it's a MonkeyPod is like a it's kinda like a hybrid CRM because you can do your accounting. It's almost like QuickBooks and, oh, there's a monkey no, we use the monkey one.
MailChimp.
MailChimp, yeah. So it's
Hmm.
almost like QuickBooks and MailChimp, uh, merged,
Combined.
and
Okay.
that's what MonkeyPod is, and it really is very easy to use, but we also still have an accountant that we contract with monthly who does all of our accounting.
Hmm.
As people of color, we have to be so far above board with all of our
Yeah.
documentation and financials, and so we make sure that we're not only handling that in-house. We have somebody who does nonprofit accounting for, 2 dozen orgs who's, very
Hmm.
well known in the community and respected, who's also giving us a second, getting an extra set of eyes on there to say, "Yes, you're doing everything by the book and above board, and, every penny is accounted for."
Okay. I haven't heard of Monkey Pod, so thank you. I'm gonna check
Yeah,
that out. That sounds really
yeah.
cool. While we're on the topic of money, let's talk about fundraising a little bit. So you all, I understand that you all have both membership dues as a form of revenue. Um, uh, Likely are getting grants, right? As well. You talked about some of the grants. What would you say if you're painting a picture of like your fundraising strategy right now? How would you break it down in terms of like grants versus individual giving versus membership dues or city government contracts?
Well, I actually would say we don't have a strategy right now,
Hey, at
to
least you're
be honest.
honest. You're
No.
honest with yourself. That's the step
Y
one.
yeah, I think, that's been something that, we do finally have a development staff starting in January, but that's been something for the last couple years. It's just kinda been a lot of grit and trying to get out there and meet folks and apply for grants, and so our biggest funding right now actually does come from grants, and we don't really have any individual donors. We've got maybe 4 folks, so thank you to them.
Hmm.
But we have to expand that. We have to
Yeah.
expand that. And we've had a couple government contracts. We had 2 in 2020, 4 and 5, and I'll be applying for another one here. I just got a notice that it was going to be released soon. So we do have a couple government grants, but most of them come from private foundation.
Okay.
And I'm actually preparing this to send my first, kinda end of the year, email, blitz here,
Hmm.
this month. So
Giving
folks will be
Tuesday kind of thing or
well,
what?
yeah, we don't do it. We're not signed up with Giving Tuesday, or in Clark County, they
Hmm.
call it Give More 24.
Okay.
But, I'm just gonna send, I'm gonna take a week and send an
Yeah.
email a day and just ask
Yeah.
folks to become sustaining donors and,
Hmm.
give us $5, $10, $20,
Yeah.
whatever you got.
Sure.
So
Okay. All right.
we're
That
still
sounds good.
we're still learning.
Yeah.
That's been, fundraising has been one of the biggest. I mean, there's a learning curve for everything, but
Yeah.
fundraising and accounting has probably been the biggest learning curves of this job.
Oh, I imagine. I know you said you have a bookkeeper that you contract with, right? Um, you've hired a development staff. What will you kind of put first on their agenda?
Yeah. First is just to get to know the organization and the community.
Hmm.
Our so I joked that we don't have a strategy, but I will say, um, our C4 is very new. We just publicly launched it this summer. Um, I think that for us, fundraising is going to be about tying dollars to grassroots movement building and power building.
Hmm.
It's probably going to be about trying to get small dollar donations from people who are interested in what we're doing and trying
Hmm.
to bring them into our movement to build progressive political power for
Hmm.
people of color and working class white folks across Southwest Washington. And so I think that's going to be, come to
Hmm.
an open house that we have, learn about the policies that we're trying to advance, and while you're here, could you give us again the 5, 10, $25? And
Hmm.
how do we steward your relationship, not because you gave a large amount of money, but because you live in our community, and
Right.
you deserve to live in a community where everyone is able to thrive, and we wanna be
Mhm.
a part of making that happen, and we know that you do too, and so come along this journey with us, and if that means, $5, great. We'll take
Mhm.
it and put it to good use and let you know that we value that. So, I think she's very interested in community-centric fundraising principles, which I think are
Mhm.
very well aligned with our values, and
Yeah.
so I think I'm excited about movement building with fundraising as a component.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, fundraising is 100% relational, right? Like you have to have those relationships. So starting with the grassroots donor strategy sounds like a really good place for you all, you know. Um, uh, you know, uh, Maybe last question I'll ask you is, um, what do how are you planning for this, let's say this next 5 year period, right? Where we're doing, this podcast is meant to be evergreen, but we're doing this interview towards the end of 2025. Things have, shifted a lot in terms of the nonprofit landscape just in the last year, but certainly since the pandemic. Um, and in the kind of racial justice, racial equity space as well. So, as a community leader, as an organizational leader, how are you thinking about, what are the pillars that you're going to be um, holding on to, I guess, to move forward, continue building your work over the next 5 years?
I love that question, Jordan. Um, we did strategic planning earlier this year, and part of that was a pretty significant survey to a large portion of community, and almost 80% of respondents said that our number one value, the number one most important uh, um, trait about our organization, number one most important trait about our organization was that they trusted us, community trusted us to never deviate from our mission.
Mm,
And this was coming out at the same time, we were doing this survey at the same time that executive orders were coming out this year to criminalize DE&I, or basically
mhm.
criminalize melanin, right?
Yeah.
And so to have almost 80% of people say they trust us to never deviate from our mission of advancing racial justice, um, is a mandate to us that we cannot ever stop. And
Mhm.
so I think that will always be something that you know, there are people who there are organizations now who are changing the way they say things, they're changing what they say, and we cannot change what we say, when we say it, how we say it, who we say it
Mhm.
to. We will
Mhm.
always be one of the first organizations on the front line saying, Black Lives Matter, Brown Lives Matter, Gay Lives Matter,
Mhm.
Indigenous
Yeah.
Lives Matter. This is something that we are deeply, deeply committed to. And then I will say, we have to, probably my biggest priority in my time at SWEC is we have to build a research and policy department, because we
Mm.
have to do community-based participatory research to determine what community-driven public policy looks like.
Mhm.
I want to see a government by the people, for the people. So if our C3 can do the research on what our community wants and needs and draft the policy, then our C4 can engage in the lobbying of elected officials. We can champion elected officials. We can
Mm.
give money to elected officials and support campaigns of elected
Mhm.
officials, and really get progressive Black and brown people and working class white folks elected to advance those policies. And so I will say that my primary focus over the next couple of years is getting our organization to a place where we're using these two organizations in a really symbiotic relationship to advance the well-being, the health, the wealth, the welfare of our communities here in Southwest Washington.
Oof. Well, that's a great note to close on. Thank you so much, Shavana, for coming on the podcast. It's really been a pleasure to speak with you and hear about the fantastic work that you all are doing. So, thanks again, and enjoy your weekend.
Thanks, Jordan. I had a lot of fun. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to How to Build a Nonprofit. If you liked the episode, check out the show notes for a link to donate to our guest organization and give us a rave review while you're at it. Feel free to leave comments and questions on your app about what intrigued you most. If you have any suggestions for future guests, email us at howtobuildanonprofit@gmail.com.